Hello bladesmiths, today I'm going to show you how to forge a simple pair of flat bit tongs out of 1-inch thick rebar stock. To make the tongs, you're going to have to do this twice since there are two separate parts. I actually had two different sets of rebar in the forge at one time because I have a 2-burner gas forge, but if you're doing a coal forge, you can probably get by with just doing one at a time. It'll just take longer. And what I am doing here, I'm just hammering 1 inch back on the rebar, making the pivot point where it's going to move back and forth. Just make sure you leave about a 1 inch part of the rebar left to run at the very front, just to go back 1 inch, just start hammering it. It's pretty simple. And I do recommend using the rounded side of a rounding hammer just to make sure there's no cracks and divots inside of your pivot point, because it's going to be making using the tongs a little bit weird and creaky. But if you don't have a rounding hammer and you just have a regular sledge, that'll work just fine. Now that you have your pivot point forged, now you're going to be working on the jaws of the tongs. Just set it on your anvil like this and just start drawing it out. Pretty simple. And do occasionally go back and make sure everything is good and straight and it lines up how you want it to. Because in the end, if it does not line up how you want it to, you will be very, very, very sad because you'll have to go back and fix it. And yes, I am speaking from experience. Make sure that your bit part is pretty rectangular, that way it'll hold the steel as best it possibly can, because as you can see mine is sort of a teardrop shape, and I sort of fixed it towards the end, but it'll just look a lot better if you just pay attention to that right when you start forging it. Now that you're done with your jaws, you can go down to the bottom of your rebar and just start making this divot shape. I think that it looks a lot better, but you totally don't have to do it. It just kind of brings together the whole build. Now you want to go back and drill a hole in your pivot point. Just make for certain that your drill bit is the same exact size as the pin you're going to use for your tongs. After you put your pin in your tongs, you just want to hit it a few times with your hammer so that it doesn't fall out after you put it in. The kind of stock that I'm using for my pin is 1/4 inch stainless steel, I think, and it's about 1/4 inch long. Now what you want to do is just set the whole thing in your forge and pull it out and just set the pin. Just hit the top of it, go back and forth, and just make sure it mushrooms right over the tongs so that it's nice and set in there and it won't fall out. And when you have your pin set, you just want to go back and get your jaws how you want them. Do that by sort of hitting the back of them so that you get it good and level, and then you can go back and correct the front, so don't freak out if they start touching. But just make sure you hit the back and just kind of get it drawed down, and then after that you can focus on how wide you want it. Right now I'm just shaping how wide I want the bit to be. I found that railroad spikes is a pretty good standard for how wide you want your bit to be. Do make sure that when you're forging your bit, the reins of your tongs, that's the handles of your tongs, are in the position you would be holding them in, so spaced out the way you would be holding them when you're making something, so that when you go back and open and shut it, it stays the exact same way. But that is just really, really important, so make sure you do that. And here are the tongs all finished up. I went through lots of tribulations making this, but in the end it turned out pretty okay. I was able to hold a pretty good variety of things with these tongs pretty tightly. It gave me lots of strength, and they just were pretty good tongs just overall, and they can hold railroad spikes better than any of my other really expensive tongs that I have. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.